So the first argument and the strongest argument against those deviant sects, right, against the Khawarij, as Ibn Abbas anhuma mentioned, is that I come to you from the companions of the Prophet ﷺ, and none of them are amongst you. I mean, how can they claim that all the companions of the Prophet ﷺ that were still alive at the time were upon misguidance, but they were upon the truth? So again, off the bat, this shows that they are misguided, that they are deviant. And that shows us that sticking to the path of the companions is a safe path. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen, wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. This is the 7th lesson of this class, the authentic statements of the companions anhum. May Allah be pleased with them all, with all the companions of the Prophet ﷺ. And they're all, we love them all, we follow them all, we respect them all. Now, of course, that being said, we also recognize that they're human beings, so we don't hold any of them above their status to be infallible or that they're perfect, right? We follow the Prophet ﷺ and his sunnah, and again, we take the example of the companions. Again, they were the best of people, collectively, as a generation. And individually, they varied in their levels, right? Some were better than others. And we'll come to that, inshallah. Now, this lesson, lesson number 7, is the statement of Ali bin Abi Talib radiallahu anhu. Another companion, Ubaidullah radiallahu anhu, narrates that the Haruriyya, that group, the Haruriyya, now that group were from the Khawarij, right? The Haruriyya or the Khawarij. When they went out, they separated themselves during the Khilafah of Ali bin Abi Talib radiallahu anhu, when they separated themselves. And of course, again, that deviant sect started before, right? But we won't go into the details of that, what the Prophet ﷺ mentioned about them in the Sunnah during the Khilafah of Uthman radiallahu anhu. But this specific incident and statement of Ali happened during his Khilafah, when the Haruriyya, when that group of the Khawarij separated themselves from the rest of the Muslims, from the community of the believers, from the Jama'ah, and from Ali radiallahu anhu, who was Khalifa at the time. And they basically separated themselves, took themselves outside from being under his authority, from being obedient to him as the Khalifa, as the ruler. And of course we know, which unfortunately there's a lot of misguidance, a lot of falsehood being spread these days about this principle from the Sunnah. A lot of doubts, a lot of misconceptions, a lot of false claims, but it's very simple. It's outlined in the authentic Sunnah, outlined in the books of Aqidah of Al-Sunnah wal-Jama'ah, right? This is a well-established principle, right? Again, you have extremes. Again, as always, you have one extreme. The obedience to the ruler is unconditional, right? And they succumb to the ruler, whatever the ruler does, whether it's good or bad, they follow him in that. They beautify, decorate it for them. They just praise the ruler no matter what he does. If he's doing something bad or wrong, their goal is just to praise and kind of suck up to the ruler, right? Again, one extreme, and that's upon misguidance. And the other extreme is those who, like the Khawarij, they incite rebellion against the ruler. They remove themselves from obeying the ruler, even in what's permissible, what's righteous, what's good. They instigate people, the masses, to hate the ruler, to rebel against the ruler, even if he's Muslim, because of some of his sins or shortcomings. When the Prophet ﷺ outlined all of this for us, it's very clear and simple, right? There's no obedience to any of the creation of Allah and the disobedience of Allah. So we only obey other people and based on what Allah or the Prophet ﷺ have said. Like our parents, we obey our parents based on what is permissible, based on what is halal, based on what is good. If they command us to do anything bad, we don't obey them in that. So same thing, the obedience to the ruler, the person who is in charge of us, who has authority over us, a person under whose charge we are, we're living under their authority, right? The ruler who is over us, the obedience to them is not unconditional. Again, it's conditional to what is permissible, to what is good, to what is righteous. So if a ruler commands someone to do something bad, something evil, of course we do not obey them in that. And again, that's the middle path of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. And again, as the Prophet ﷺ taught in so many authentic hadith, that unless we see clear kufr, we do not rebel against the ruler and try to forcefully remove him. And again, this is an extensive topic, and there's a lot to be said, and there's a lot to be quoted from the Quran and Sunnah and from the Salaf. But bottom line is, Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, they do not see or view that we should rebel against the unjust Muslim ruler. That's one of the principles of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. So unless we see clear kufr, we obey the ruler in what is permissible and not in what is evil. We do not obey them in what is bad, but we do not rebel against them, and we're patient because Allah is testing us. Allah is testing us with that. And as long as they're Muslim, then again, being patient upon that is less of an evil than trying to rebel and physically remove by force that rule. Because again, what's that rule going to do most of the time? If they're truly oppressive and evil, do people think they're just going to step aside? They're going to fight back. They're going to kill other people justly or unjustly. If they don't care, if they're already an oppressive ruler, again, a lot of Muslim blood will be shed, and it will generate and cause instability and greater harm than good. And in most cases, it might not even succeed. So regardless of that, this is all, by the way, regardless of any of that, the bottom line is we follow the Sunnah, right? We don't try to rationalize any of that. The Prophet ﷺ said, we do not, again, when he described that there will be these evil rulers that will come in the future, you will see that. Companions asked him, what should we do? Should we not fight them? He said, no, do not fight them unless you see clear kufr. Clear kufr. And again, this is another area which a lot of people have confusion about. What constitutes kufr? What doesn't constitute kufr? But again, this is not something we're going to go into details here. But the bottom line is that our obedience to Allah and His Messenger ﷺ is what dictates our obedience to anyone else. And obedience to anyone else, whether it be the ruler, whether it be our parents, or anyone else who has authority over us, is conditional to what is permissible and to what is Islamically acceptable and what is good, what is righteous. And it does not include disobeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in trying to obey anyone else. In any case, going back to that incident when the KHAWAARIJ, the Haruriyya, they separated themselves, wanting to rebel against Ali radiallahu anhu, again making claims about Ali. So they said, عن عبيد الله رضي الله عنه أن الحرورية لما خرجت وهو مع علي بن أبي طالب رضي الله عنه قالوا لا حكم إلا لله لا حكم إلا لله قال علي كلمة حق أريد بها باطل. The reference for this is Sahih Muslim 1066. Now, that companion Ubaydullah, he said when the Haruriyya, when these Khawarij separated themselves, and he was with Ali anhu, and the Khawarij said لا حكم إلا لله. They said لا حكم إلا لله. There is no rule except for Allah. Again, we see that today. They're saying, the rule belongs only to Allah. They want to implement the Sharia, etc., right? We see that today. But anyways, and this is based on the Quran, and this is a valid, sound principle. Rule only belongs to Allah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who sent down legislation, and it is obligatory upon us as Muslims and believers to implement the teachings of Islam and follow the rulings that Allah sent down. The rulings that Allah sent down for us. And the Sharia encompasses all of that. People sometimes pick and choose, say the Sharia is this, is that. No, the Sharia encompasses all the teachings of Islam. It's all part of the Sharia. Everything that Allah has legislated for us. So it includes what the ruler implements in terms of laws and punishments and governance between people, governing a whole community or a whole nation, and also includes how people interact with one another, how they do financial transactions, how a husband and wife, their rights and responsibilities includes a person's acts of worship, personal acts of worship between him and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, includes everything, encompasses everything. The Sharia is comprehensive. And so, in any case, the Khawarij said, La hukma illa lillah. There's no rule except for Allah. The rule only belongs to Allah. And again, that statement of itself is a true statement. Ali radiallahu anhu, again, based on the Quran, right? Ali radiallahu anhu, what did he say in response? Right? Because you look at the statement itself, you look at the context, who's saying it, why they're saying it, what do they mean behind saying it. Ali radiallahu anhu, he said, kalimatu haqqin urida biha batil. A statement of truth, that thing, what they said, la hukma illa lillah, there's no rule except for Allah. The rule only belongs to Allah. He said that's a statement of truth with which falsehood was intended. With which falsehood was intended. Again, that statement of itself is a statement of truth. But within this context, used by the Khawarij to misapply, misinterpret, and using it in this context against him, to basically, they're trying to say, oh, well, he's not ruling by the Sharia, thus he's a kafir, and we want to rebel against him and remove him, and he's not ruling, the rule only belongs to Allah, right? That in that context, they're intending falsehood with it, right? They're misunderstanding, misapplying, and intending falsehood with saying that statement, even though that statement in of itself is true. So again, we learn a lot of lessons from this. Number one, the Khawarij of today that we see, and their people who fall for their misguidance, you know, and again, we have to be cautious when labeling others specifically as Khawarij, right? Again, you have extremes. You have some people who say, oh, you can't ever label anyone as from the Khawarij, right? Or as a deviant, ever, no matter what they do or say. And the other extreme, those who loosely label anyone that disagrees with them on anything to be deviant, or to be from Khawarij, or from this deviant sect, or that deviant sect, right? And the deviant sects are a lot, right? So we have to be cautious. And the middle path is that we see the ideology of these deviant sects, the ideology of the Khawarij, and we are cautious from falling into it. We are able to identify who is falling into that ideology, even if they might not be from the Khawarij, but they're falling into that same ideology, or they're falling into those doubts and misconceptions. And we're able to protect ourselves and others around us from it, and point it out, and respond to it, and refute it, and point out that this is a deviation, this is what the Khawarij believe, right? And but being cautious when labeling others. That doesn't mean a qualified person can never label someone else as from being from a certain deviant sect, or to be a deviant, but it's something to be very cautious about, right? And again, just like with takfir and labeling another Muslim as a kafir, something is very serious and severe, right? Now that doesn't mean that a Muslim might not fall into an act of kufr, or might not become a kafir and leave the deen, right? But again, you need a qualified scholar to follow the conditions and the guidelines based on the Quran and Sunnah when applying a general ruling of takfir on a specific individual, on a specific Muslim that might have fallen into an act of kufr or shirk. And so it's important to make a distinction between the two, right? So we might see a Muslim, for example, who falls into an act of kufr or shirk. We say, this person has fallen into an act of kufr, or this is an act of kufr. But to say that he's a kafir are two separate things. To say that what he's doing is an act of shirk, for example, and saying that he's a mushrik, they're two separate, vastly different things, right? And not every Muslim who falls into an act of kufr or an act of shirk is automatically a kafir or a mushrik, right? There's conditions and guidelines. In some cases he might be, in some cases he might not be, right? So in any case, same thing with tabdi', or labeling someone as a deviant. So again, there's two separate things. Saying that this person, the ideology he's calling to, or what he's falling into, or the view he holds is deviant, right? Is an innovated view, or is not from the Sunnah, right? In between saying that he himself is a deviant. Again, not to say we don't want to go to either extreme. There is a middle path, but again, it's important to be cautious not to fall into either extreme. Not to say that, oh, someone, no matter what they do, they can never be a deviant, they can never be a kafir. And the other extreme of loosely labeling other Muslims unjustly many times and by people who are unqualified to do so, labeling other Muslims to be kafirs or deviants. But in any case, going back to that statement, Ali radiallahu anhu is emphasizing the point that not anytime someone says a statement of truth, they're using it within a correct context, using it with the right understanding and implementation of that, right? And number two, also emphasizing that just because they say something that's true doesn't mean it actually applies to that situation, right? So they say, for example, someone might come and say, lying is haram. Yeah, lying is haram. But when they're saying it in a certain context, accusing someone of lying when that person is telling the truth, you can see how they're using something that is true in a false context, right? Or intending falsehood behind it, right? And they're saying it that way, and they're implying that that person is lying when he is truthful or telling the truth. Or like in this case, when the KHAWAARIJ, they said to Ali radiallahu anhu, la hukma illa lillah, they're implying, that saying is true, but they're implying that he's not ruling by the hukum of Allah. Again, that is false. That's a false accusation against Ali radiallahu anhu. So he said, statement of truth, what they said is a statement of truth. The rule belongs to Allah only, to Allah alone. But with which falsehood was intended. But they intend falsehood from behind it. They're trying to use it as a justification to rebel against Ali radiallahu anhu, fight against him, and not be under his, not pledge allegiance to him as the Khalifa, and not be under his authority. So again, lessons from that is sometimes people might say something that is technically true, but their objective or aim behind it is something false, and they're trying to justify their own falsehood or misguidance behind saying that true thing. Right? And again, we see that a lot of times. People quote a hadith, for example, they're arguing something, and then they quote a hadith, but that hadith isn't relevant to the point they're trying to make. What they're trying to say is false. The hadith is true, but they're trying to use it as proof when it doesn't actually prove what they're trying to say. And again, this also shows us that deviant sect of the KHAWAARIJ in that instance, and the Prophet ﷺ had warned us from the KHAWAARIJ extensively. And what's interesting is to note is that none of the companions, that's why, again, to emphasize, this is why we're doing this book, this class, why we emphasize following the Salaf, following the understanding of the companions, because they were upon the straight path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We should follow the way they understood and practiced the Quran and Sunnah, because that is what the Prophet ﷺ, that is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have affirmed to be the straight path, the correct understanding of practice of the deen. So it's important to note, when Ibn Abbas went to the KHAWAARIJ to call them back to the truth and presented arguments against their arguments, and thousands of them returned to the truth, and thousands of them remained upon their misguidance, and they've ended up fighting against the companions, against Ali radiallahu anhu and the rest of the companions with them, and they are killed by the companions. Now, and again, so you can see the misguidance of someone when they're fighting against the companions of the Prophet ﷺ. So, but in any case, the point is, it's important to note, one of the first things that Ibn Abbas anhuma mentioned when he went to the KHAWAARIJ after they separated themselves, during the time of Ali anhu, the first thing that he said, I come to you from the companions of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and none of them are amongst you. That is the first argument he used against them, is that none of the companions are amongst the KHAWAARIJ. So in other words, what is he saying? What you guys are upon is pure misguidance. You've deviated from the Sunnah, because none of the companions who learned the deen directly from the Prophet ﷺ, and who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran, the Prophet ﷺ praised their understanding and practice, and confirmed it, right? Because revelation was coming down, they were learning from the Prophet ﷺ and implementing the deen during the lifetime of the Prophet ﷺ, when revelation was still being sent down. So their practice was affirmed as and praised as correct and good, and their understanding was affirmed, right? Anytime if a companion did something wrong, they were corrected by the Prophet ﷺ, or the revelation would come down, right? If they did, but again, collectively, their understanding and practice was praised and confirmed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? The revelation is still coming down when they were learning the deen and implementing the deen and practicing it and understanding it, right? And anytime they had something to clarify, they asked the Prophet ﷺ directly, and he clarified and explained to them, or Allah revealed verses clarifying that. So the first argument and the strongest argument against those deviant sects, right, against the Khawarij, as Ibn Abbas anhuma mentioned, is that I come to you from the companions of the Prophet ﷺ, and none of them are amongst you. I mean, how can they claim that all the companions of the Prophet ﷺ that were still alive at the time were upon misguidance, but they were upon the truth? So again, off the bat, this shows that they are misguided, that they are deviant. And that shows us that sticking to the path of the companions is a safe path. And this also shows us that some of the people who had initially joined the Khawarij were sincere, but they were misguided. They were wrong. They were mistaken. Because when Ibn Abbas approached them and proved to them from the Quran and Sunnah that what they were upon, what the Khawarij were upon, was false and incorrect, many of them left their falsehood and went back to the truth. They've accepted the proof that he presented from the Quran and Sunnah, from divine revelation. So thousands of them went back to the truth, and they were convinced with Ibn Abbas's proof that he presented from the Quran and Sunnah. But the rest of the Khawarij, thousands others from the Khawarij, remained upon their falsehood and fought against the companions and were killed by them. And so this concludes our 7th lesson.